Thomas.
Peter, what do you say? What do you know? Hey, everybody, welcome to the Ten-Four Tavern. It's 7:06. Sorry, we're a couple 30 seconds later, something getting the intro going. But April 21st, my son's birthday, 33 years old. His wife's taking him out on a little fancy steak dinner tonight. So happy birthday to my oldest. Not necessarily my favorite. He's definitely my favorite oldest. So there's that. But shout out to him, and he's a DC Metro PD cop. So happy birthday to the kid. So we have a great guest tonight, Pete.
Yes.
We're going to talk about guns. We're going to talk about firearms. We're going to talk about ballistic evidence tool mark, because I got yelled at for getting the title wrong. So Stephanie's going to clear it up. So welcome to the Ten-Four Tavern. Stephanie, why don't you say hi, everybody, and welcome to the tavern.
Hey, guys, and thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about some stuff that I quite enjoy.
Yeah. So listen, tonight we're going to talk about crime gun intelligence. We're going to get into it. Pete and I have our versions of what that looked like back in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s. Pete, being involved in the Fast and Furious and Trigger Lock, really cool stories that all tie into this stuff as it relates to guns. And everyone says the gun tells a story. We have a whole bunch of colleagues and friends we'll probably name drop throughout the night of people doing really important stuff for, going back 10, 20, 30 years and currently doing it today. 92 Charlie and Nolan, they want to know where you are, Pete. So we'll let you tell everybody where you are in a second. We're going to talk about the Charlie Kirk ballistic evidence that's been released and what's publicly available, open source. We're not going to go into things that we shouldn't know. I don't think we do know, but we do. Stephanie's career and how she gets involved in being involved in firearms and shooting guns and matching ballistics and helping solve crimes. And everyone should know that we had Anasiga Nicolazzi, a homicide prosecutor, a couple of weeks ago. We have Stephanie tonight on the ballistics and forensic side of the shop. And then in the future, coming up, we have Michelle McPhee coming up, who was the police bureau chief of the New York Daily News in the 90s and 2000s as well. And so these are all people that are not law enforcement sworn, but they're contributing. And, Michelle's a little interesting because she reports both sides, but we definitely use the media to further cases and investigations and generate leads as well. So it's an interesting perspective. And she goes deep into the Boston Marathon bombing. She's one of the most dogged, determined true crime reporters. She has a whole bunch. She has about 7 or 8 nonfiction books on true crime stuff out there. We'll talk to her. But anyway, it's not just the cops and not just the detectives and not just the analysts that contribute to justice. So Stephanie, again, welcome again, and let's kick it at the tavern,
Sounds good. Well, where do you want to start? You want to first start off to tell the audience how I got upset with you because you are.
Yeah. Tell them how you opened up a can of whoop ass on me for getting the title wrong. I thought it was easier. And, I do have to go sensational for social media to get the hooks and get the people interested. But I committed a faux pas. I took my beating. Why don't you explain what a tool mark examiner is and explain the real title and where it all comes from and what it's all about. It's not just about firearms, quality and all that kind of good stuff. And then we'll take it from there. That's who you are now. That's what you're doing now. And then we'll go back to the origin. How'd you get started? And Pete will chime in and ask you, hit it up.
Okay. So I'm just kind of giving Tom some crap, but so we're kind of known in the field as ballistic experts, but truly we are not into ballistics. So ballistics is a study of the projectile in motion. So that's not exactly what I do. I deal with firearm and tool mark identification instead. So in ballistics, there's 3 different fields: internal, external, and terminal. Okay, so if it's any part of ballistics, I deal with the internal stuff. So basically stuff that happens with the ammunition components while it's in the gun, right up until the time it leaves the muzzle of the gun. And so when people think of ballistics, they assume that's what I do, which, a lot of people would just kind of go with it. But that's not exactly what I what I do. And so I kind of, as a forensic scientist and someone who's in firearms in this field, like, so we try to correct people and say, hey, no, I'm a firearm tool mark identification expert. I'm not even a firearm expert. Like, a firearm expert has to deal with guns specifically. Like, so we're talking more gunsmithing. And while I have a lot of training in that field, I am not a gun expert. I couldn't tell you, some of the guns used, throughout history. Like, I only know, like, high level knowledge, not in depth. So your gunsmiths are going to be a little better on that. But what we do is in firearm tool mark identification, it's basically an area of forensic science that deals with the examination of firearms evidence found at crime scenes. So such as guns, cartridge cases, and bullets. And we're often asked to determine if these items were or were not fired from a specific firearm. And if no gun was submitted in the case, then we're asked, like, maybe how many guns were used in the crime. Other things that we can do are serial numbers. So some criminals think that if you just scratch off serial numbers and obliterate them, that they're gone. But there's some magic that we can do in this area to recover and restore obliterated serial numbers. We also work with NIBIN, which is what we're going to get into. So the firearms database that ATF runs. Okay. And then also tool marks. So that's a piece that a lot of people leave off. I'm a firearm and tool mark examiner. So a gun is essentially a tool. Okay. But I'm talking about tools like knives, crowbars, screwdrivers, pliers, wrenches, mallets, axes, anything you can think of that creates a mark on a softer surface. All right, we deal with tool marks and tools. Also, let's say muzzle to target distance determination. So how far someone was when they were shot from the muzzle of the gun. And so usually this is done when there is a decedent, so when someone has passed away. If there was a self-defense claim, like we're often asked, like, hey, can you tell how far away this person was from the muzzle of the gun when it was discharged? So we'll do things like that. And then also in my field, sometimes we do shooting scene and, reconstruction. So like crime scene reconstruction, but specifically looking at trajectory. So where the shots are coming from. So all of those different things encompasses firearm and tool mark identification.
Yep. So Pete, Stephanie was talking about not being a firearms expert. And so I think we have a common friend. Well, he's probably closer to you. I met him a few times. Rich Vasquez from the ATF. That, I think, is what Stephanie was referring to as a firearm expert. I don't know that there's a firearm that's been manufactured in the world that guy doesn't know and doesn't have access to. And if you know him well enough, you can go to the woods somewhere in West Virginia and let it rip. So you want to talk a little bit about what an ATF firearm expert might look like versus an examiner?
Well, ATF has, well, first off, a lot of people are under the impression that ATF agents are experts in guns, and that's absolutely not true. I don't know a hell of a lot about guns. I know some. We get training on firearms identification, firearms nomenclature, but within ATF's world, there's a firearms technology branch, and then there are interstate nexus experts. Those folks have a lot more training on being able to identify a firearm, where it's made, be able to tell by the proof marks on it. Because in Europe, they stamp proof marks that will indicate what factory specifically the firearm was made at. So there's a handful of people within ATF that I would say are like the top firearms experts in the world, Rick Vasquez being one of them. Another is a guy named Steve Barberini, who's a retired agent out of West Palm Beach, still working in law enforcement. I believe he works for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office now. So, but yeah, I mean, within ATF, there's a handful of people that I would say are experts in firearms, but most agents aren't. And even the interstate nexus experts, they have a high degree of training in identifying firearms and knowing where they come from, how they're made, how they're transported. But even those folks aren't the true experts to the level of Rick and Steve Barberini and some of the other folks.
Yep. So everybody, it is the Tavern, and I see Terry Murnane. Shout out to Terry Murnane, who's always on the podcast, not only here, but the Finest Unfiltered and the executive perspective as well. He's always got a coffee with him. Tonight, Pete and Stephanie are both going H2O water, high quality H2O for any of the Waterboy fans from Bobby Boucher and the Waterboy movie. One of my favorites, Kathy Bates and her donkey, pretty funny stuff. But anyway, and I have an espresso martini in, as I always say, an old fashioned with a large coffee rock to keep it cold so I can nurse it all night. But 92 Charlie, thanks. Espresso martini, that's my go-to. I use vanilla vodka, and I use Mr. Black or Borghetti. I don't like Kahlua as the sweetener. But but anyway, Stephanie and Pete going H2O tonight. We're keeping it real. But this is always the opportunity. Please, drinks are fun. They're social. However, please don't overindulge. Please do not drink yourself and self-medicate. And if you have problems, please. So Pete.
Yeah, man, it's okay to not be okay. It's not okay not to do something about it, which is funny because that's today I actually lectured a bunch of peer support responders from the Department of Justice down here in San Antonio. That's what I'm doing down here, is talking to folks who are living exactly that. They volunteer as a collateral duty to help agents and candidly the public in times of need. I don't know if folks know this, but after some of the mass shootings, including Sandy Hook, ATF peer responders went up and talked to family members, just tried to do what they do to get folks to understand that, there are opportunities out there to get help. So, yeah, I'm down here, had the honor today, spent 2.5 hours talking to those folks about some of the stuff I've experienced over the years. So, yeah, it's okay to not be okay. It's not okay not to do something about it.
Whoa. 2.5 hours. We do 2 hours on the podcast. You're like, okay, that's enough. We did a 3-hour one. You gave me a hard time. Like, you're doing 2.5 hours. Come on, Pete. I need the stamina. We might go 2.5, 3 with Stephanie tonight because we're going to do some CSI crime scene stuff for all the true crime buffs. They might want to hang around and hear some pretty cool stuff, man. So Pete's got to get a flight. So we're gonna try and keep it to 2. All right, Steph. So yeah, you got that. The drinking, Tabitha Foster. I do not drink. That's perfectly okay. We have teetotalers here. Maybe in the 80s we might have made fun of you, but we're smarter than that now. We learned a little bit over the years, so it's all good, Tabitha. Thanks for coming tonight. And Detective Nolan, and a Costco alkaline H2O. All right, well, maybe, that's where you got to be. So Stephanie, where'd you grow up, and what's the path, and how do you end up being, wait, let me get it, because I will never make this mistake ever again. A firearm and tool mark identification and quality expert. How do you get there? Take us through.
Oh, Lord. Well, funny you brought up the water boy, and I'm glad you said something nice about it, because I am from New Orleans, Louisiana. Okay?
Oh.
A lot of people associate the water boy with Louisiana. And I would tend to say that parts of Louisiana, that's very accurate. Louisiana should be a country of its own. Like, the north and the south of Louisiana are 2 complete separate parts. I'm from the southern, but not that south, like the water boy or the swamp people south. So that's kind of where I came from. Like, I was born in the New Orleans area, actually a small town called Opelousas. I was born on Father's Day. So I was actually, the town was so small. That was in the newspaper when I was born. My mom's very proud. She said I was always destined to be a star because, I was born on Father's Day in the newspaper. But so let's see. I lived most of my life in the New Orleans area up until I was about 8, and then we moved overseas. So I lived over in Europe. So I lived in Scotland and London. My father was in the oil industry. And then we came back when I was early teen and back to the New Orleans area. So I was actually raised by 2 New Yorkers, Tom. I don't know if if you knew that from talking to you. Yeah, both.
Wait a second. Before we call them New Yorkers, where in New York?
The Bronx.
Okay. So that's true New Yorkers, because anything north of New York is upstate for me, and then anything north of Albany is Canada. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that. And I'd love to hear the chat fight on that one.
But yes, most of my parents are from like the North Bronx, they would say. And so I was actually raised by 2 Northerners down south. I will tell you, I didn't know what like a grit or a collard green was until like my late teens, because they didn't cook like that. But I definitely call myself a Southern girl. So let's kind of see. I knew I wanted to get into this field at an early age. God gave me this passion in my heart at a very early age, like 11, 12 years old. I wanted to be in the forensics world. And so I know it might be not politically correct to say it, but like I saw the movie Silence of the Lambs when I was at 11, 12 years.
Okay.
And that movie changed my life. It just changed the course of my life. I thought that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in forensics. Didn't know about the FBI, but forensics for sure. And so I knew I was going to do that. And so I knew I had to go to college. And so I went to the University of New Orleans and went to school. And during that time, CSI came out. I'm not going to necessarily date myself, but CSI came out and it kind of really flooded the market. And I will say this just right up front, you know, in court, we actually have something called the CSI effect. And so I'm sure you guys have heard of it.
Yeah, but we'll get into that when we get into the court stuff for sure.
Perfect. So I knew because of the flood that I had to set myself apart somehow to the agency. So what I decided was to get a master's. You don't need a master's in this field at all, unless you want to really start promoting on the administrative side. But I said, let me get a master's and let me get into law enforcement. Tom, I don't know if you knew I was in law enforcement. So I started my career off. I moved after I graduated from the University of New Orleans with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology. I moved to the great state of Oklahoma. And if anybody hasn't been to Oklahoma, it's a much more interesting state than I ever thought of. And when I first moved there, I had this like predisposition of like Native American Indians running around, tumbleweeds, flatlands. Like that's what I thought Oklahoma was. Not that at all. Okay, no tumbleweeds. It was extremely hilly, and I think Oklahoma is the one state in the country that has almost every natural disaster that happens is in Oklahoma. The ice storm, ridiculous. I've never seen weather like I have in Oklahoma, and I'm from New Orleans, so we're used to hurricanes. But it's no joke in Oklahoma. But anyway, so I got a master's at the University of Central Oklahoma. I got a master's in forensic science, concentration criminalistics. And so even though I'm in firearms, and currently now, there are a lot of accredited universities that offer degrees in the field I am in currently, but back then there weren't. So if you wanted to go to school in forensics, it mostly was DNA track or like the drug chemistry or toxicology track. Okay, so I actually chose the DNA side. DNA was what I thought I wanted to be in. The concept of DNA and molecular biology and genetics, that is really interesting to me. Yeah. Okay, but in school I did a few internships. So one of the internships I did was with the OSBI, and I worked with some forensic biology folks. And although I loved the concept, I didn't enjoy the day-to-day work. Okay, I realized that it was a little too mundane for me, and I needed a little something more exciting in my eyes. And so I had one class while I was in grad school, physical aspects, and actually his name is Tom Bevel. So Tom Bevel probably doesn't know how he shaped my life, and Tom Bevel is a well-known bloodstain expert, right? That's written books and everything, and he's not really in the field anymore, but he was my teacher, and he taught a physical aspects class, and it had firearms, and it truly changed the course of my life. And from that moment on, I then did an internship with the Air Force. So I worked with the OSI, Office of Special Investigations. I started thinking about maybe going into the military on the side of things with forensics. Decided against that, obviously, but I got into law enforcement. So I became a deputy for the Oklahoma County Sheriff's Office. I don't know if you know that, Tom.
No, listen, we know each other, and it's probably a good almost 10 years now, but I'm still learning tonight, and I think I was looking forward to that.
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, we could do a whole nother podcast about my time with the Sheriff's Office, because I worked in the jail. Okay, right. And so, and this wasn't like a normal county jail. This was a 3,200 inmate jail. You know, we housed the Unabomber, Macaulay Culkin. You know, they had I throw Macaulay Culkin in there. He was in our jail. But 3,200 inmates, 13 floors, all security risks. You know, from DOC. You know, and then ICE, and you know, all the admin seg stuff, and it was an experience of a lifetime. I will tell you that. I feel like everybody in this world needs to do a quick like shadow with two people. One, cops. possibly in a jail. 2, a waitress. So you can learn to be a little respectful and see what they go through. Those are the 2 jobs I would say for sure.
Yeah. Well, Tabitha Foster, I like her. Well, I think by the end of the episode, we're gonna have a lot more people liking Stephanie. She's kicking ass and taking names out here, and I say that in the utmost respect. You're doing really great stuff, and you have been, obviously, the stuff I didn't even know about, the corrections and stuff. And we're gonna hear about some really cool stuff. But yeah, go ahead, keep going. Let's take it through because we're gonna get into some CSI stuff. So.
Stop me and jump in, or just bring something and ask a question, because like people who knows me, I can just talk. Like, I can go on and just talk. So just stop me.
So the DNA stuff is fascinating to me too. And so I started in a detective squad in '97, and the first DNA case in NYPD was '95, but the samples had to be tremendous. And then it was moving. And then by the time I got to cold case in '04, they did, and Kenny McKeel, a little shout out to Kenny McKeel, works with Pete and I, former real-time crime center commanding officer at the NYPD. When he was the commanding officer of the Detective Division Training Bureau, I believe that's where he was at the time. He secured a big grant from the Department of Justice and BJA to do the old homicide. So we went back, no suspect cases, and I was running around to evidence lockers all over the city in New York looking for biological evidence that had not previously been submitted for DNA. And then we got mattresses and all sorts of scrapings and just resubmitting everything and sending it up and hitting CODIS and then coming back and you go, here's your suspect. And so that grant, and by the way, Kenny McKeel, if I never said it before, I'm going to say it again. I made a lot of overtime on that project. So thank you very much. So I appreciate that. But Pete, you have a lot of DNA cases with you, because I know by the time you moved over, you did your trigger lock and then jumped over to the ATF.
Yeah, the DNA stuff happened while I was doing the trigger lock program. But I mean, we were locking up guys with guns, and the U.S. Attorney's Office didn't ask us for DNA. Now, a lot of the U.S. Attorney's offices want DNA tested on the firearm to link the firearm to the defendant.
Yeah.
We wanted to do that back in the day, but yeah, I didn't. I had one case that I would love to have had DNA, and we had a guy, Nathan Watts was his name. He lived in 600 Burke Avenue in the Bronx, and found him with a knife buried into his skull all the way to the hilt. And unfortunately, his 4-year-old autistic child was in the apartment with his dead body for days. So the DNA would have broken that case, but we didn't have it back then, Tommy.
Yeah. So Stephanie, you mentioned distances as well. I know you have stippling marks, and then you have distances, and you can do all those things, and then the blowbacks, and like I definitely want you to talk those things through and how. And again, can I say this is like these are all like interpretations and estimates. No one knows for sure. And then I want to talk about gunshot residue, and because that's one of the craziest things. You can have false positives or false negatives all day long. Am I right on that? And so so if you care about crime scene and forensics, this is the source of truth tonight. So we got 2 hours. It looks like a 3-hour one coming up, but we're gonna talk about some of that stuff too. So let's do that. So get back to you. Let's find out how you ended up in firearms and tool marks.
Sure. So again, I always knew that I was going to be in forensics. So, being in law enforcement was a means to an end to get to forensics. I thought I was going to go federal. So back when I was younger, I had dreams of maybe joining the ATF and the FBI. But my first job I actually took was in the state of Alabama. So I left Oklahoma and I moved to Alabama, Mobile, Alabama, where I worked for the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. So like that's the state agency for the state of Alabama. So they're the ones that hired me and offered me a position in training. So, and I started training in early 2008 to be in firearms. I will tell you, Alabama, people really don't talk much about Alabama unless it's about football. But Alabama, in my experience, was an amazing journey in my career. Okay, I did 8 years, and it might have been a lower paying job when it looks, compared to the rest of the country, the state of Alabama. I got the most experience I ever had because we were trained to do everything. I was trained to do the tool marks, the gunshot, the muzzle to target distance, you know, the crime scene reconstruction, and then also the comparison work with guns. And so not only that, you know, you brought up DNA in the sense of have you were interested in it in your cases, you know, when it first came around. Well, that's why there's such a backlog of DNA, because it is so helpful in cases. I like to say, you know, firearms is rarely the nail in the coffin in casework. Okay, so sometimes our reports, they are they're very helpful in investigative leads, but when it comes to court, DNA specifically is more important because that can identify a suspect, as opposed to, I can't put a gun in someone's hand. I can just link maybe a bullet to a gun. And so, but yes, that's why there's so much backlog in DNA. But so I worked in Alabama for about 8 years. I became a section chief of the Mobile Regional Laboratory. And why I brought up backlogs was we were down a lot of examiners in the state of Alabama. So there were 3 regional laboratories. And because we were down personnel, I had to not just work cases from the Mobile area, I worked cases from the whole state. So I was testifying all across the state for years. So I got a lot of experience very quickly. Whereas some of my colleagues, you know, they might not ever get to 100 testimonies in their whole career. I got to 100 testimonies, you know, a little more quicker. So, okay, I left Alabama in about early 2016. And I actually started on in Houston. So I'm in the Houston area right now. Pete, I just found out you're in San Antonio. Wish I would have known, but that's like about, I don't think, about 3 hours from the Houston area. Yeah, so I love San Antonio. I love the Riverwalk. I've only been twice. And the last time I went to the Alamo. Pete, have you ever been to the Alamo?
I went to the Alamo last year.
I heard they still haven't found Pee Wee's bike. I was going to go look for it.
Oh, that's what I remember from the Alamo too, growing up.
But I would have went to the basement of the Alamo, except I watched Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure, and I figured I realized there was no basement. I thought there was a basement, and I was told to go to the basement. But no, the Alamo's awesome. So for those of you who have not been there, it's very cool, great piece of history. They do a really good job of walking you through there, and they have the little exhibits on the outside and then the inside. It's not as big as you might have thought, but it's very cool. Definitely worth it. And the Riverwalk is great. It's a good town.
It is. I loved it. It reminded me a little bit of New Orleans, actually. And I will say the Alamo, one thing I was very surprised at, but do you guys know that Phil Collins has the largest collection of the Alamo history of objects in the world? Is Phil Collins. And so everything you see at the Alamo is donated from Phil Collins. So thank you, Phil Collins, for that. But anyway, sidestep. So I came to the Houston area. So HPD, you know, back in early 2014, they used to have a crime lab that was in law enforcement, but around 2014, the crime lab broke off and it became Houston Forensic Science Center. So now it's privatized. And so I actually took a job with them, and I worked there for about 8-10 months. Houston has a lot of gun crime, so great job security coming to Texas, especially Houston. But I was informed about an opportunity of starting a laboratory for the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. So Montgomery County is just north of the Houston area. Okay, so if anybody's ever heard of the Woodlands, so it's about 45 minutes north. Yeah, so the Woodlands, Conroe, that's Montgomery County. And they had their own crime lab where they did forensics, but they did not offer firearms examination. They did not offer the specialty that I have. They were sending all their cases to the state lab, DPS. And so for years, they had been wanting to start their own firearms unit in-house. So to kind of speed up the turnaround time on firearms cases. So once I heard about that, it just piqued my interest. I was kind of looking for a huge challenge. And so I took the position and became the first civilian, analyst for the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office Crime Lab. Because the entire crime lab, besides like the property and evidence and administration, was all commissioned. So I was their first civilian analyst within the crime lab. And I was there about 4 years. And I will tell you, I was looking for a challenge, and it was a challenge. So that's when I got into quality management. Okay, so I also specialize in quality management. And that's because to start a crime lab with firearms in forensics in the state of Texas, we have something called the Texas Forensic Science Commission. And you guys know this from New York, but there are actually not a lot of states in the country that have a forensic science commission, but Texas is one. Okay, so essentially that they give forensic analysts licenses to practice in their discipline. But a law that has passed is that in order for firearms reports in the state of Texas to be accepted in court, they have to come from an accredited laboratory. Okay, so to become accredited, you have to go through this very long process with policy and procedures and quality management. You have to create a document control system. And so I had to learn how to do that. What are ISO international standards? How do we abide by them? How do you start a laboratory? And honestly, I didn't know what I was doing when I signed up, but I will tell you, I'm the kind of person, I'll take the job and I'll figure it out. And that's what I did. I figured it out. I didn't know how to get into forensics before, but I figured it out. And the same with quality management. I relied on a ton of people with a lot of experience. I bothered them all the time, asked a ton of questions, and I was able to get us accredited. Let's see, from the end of 16, we were officially accredited February of 2018. And that was a huge, huge, huge celebration for the administration. And I definitely couldn't have done it alone. It was a team I worked with that were able to assist me, because I wasn't just building a firearms unit and accrediting the unit. It was the whole crime lab that had to end up becoming accredited.
So while all this is happening for accreditation, you're also taking in cases while it's happening. So I think the audience can appreciate the level of commitment that it takes to cross your T's and dot your I's and get that accreditation. But I'll be honest with you, that's not the sexy stuff, right? That's what you're doing behind the scenes. And thank you for doing that and grinding that out so that it's all good. But what's the sexy stuff is, what's the volume look like? What's the case rates coming in? What's the turnaround time on these leads? And can we get these leads into detectives' hands so they can get out there and put these cases together? So kind of walk that through while you're going through the tedious paperwork, bureaucracy, and that nonsense, but at the same time, trying to generate leads to get bad guys off the street.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't stop, but I will say this. So I was still taking in cases, I was still working cases, but I could not report out anything. And the agency knew, until we were officially accredited, I could not issue a report to that detective.
Wow.
Yep, we couldn't do it. We weren't allowed to, now we did work cases for accreditation, right, that they would come and look at. But if they were needed for court, they would have to be reworked after I was accredited. So we did have those situations. And I was the only person there. So I had a lieutenant who was a firearms examiner, and then I had 2 contractors that would come in and do all my verifications of the evidence and the reviews of the case file. So in our world, in firearms, it takes 2 firearms examiners to verify evidence, to review a case for it to even go out. So anytime a detective gets a report, 2 examiners have independently looked at that evidence.
So let me interrupt here.
Yeah.
Do you call it peer review in your space? What do you call it in your space?
So
there's a reason why I'm going to ask this.
Okay. So we have something called a verification. So that's where you're actually looking at the physical evidence. So after I finish with my casework and I come up to my conclusion, then an independent examiner will come in, typically, not know any information at all about the case, been given the evidence, and they do their own comparison without knowing my results. And when we come to the same conclusion, then the case goes to the peer review process, where we do a technical review is done of the case file, and then an administrative review is done.
All right. So the reason why I ask is because last week, Ron Layson on the executive perspective and Rob Lukash took off. He was like sunning himself in somewhere in the world. I don't know where he was. He took off, but Joe Cortezas came on and talked about facial recognition and misidentifications. And there's a half a dozen or a dozen cases out there. There's not so many that it's a problematic and it's a catastrophe out there. However, there's enough to like make people pay attention. And what they did not do is they got a potential match, and they ran out, went to a judge and said, we have a potential match. The judge, uninformed, swore out a warrant. They arrested the wrong guy, blah, blah, blah. And everybody who's paying attention to facial recognition knows there needs to be a peer review of if I think this person is the right person, if I think they match on the face with the, and because when we were at Vigilant Solutions, we had ballistics and facial recognition running parallel. That are the locks, the scars, marks, tattoos, the things that you as an examiner say, no, these things are the same. And then the background, was the person available to do the crime? Were they in the proximity to crime? Did they have a criminal history? All of these things. And like, to me, if you guys are already doing this kind of peer review stuff, why hasn't the facial recognition market taken these lessons learned, best practices? And we all know that Fizwig and those guys have been doing it. But like, why has it not been standardized? And to this day, Joe Cortezas and Ralph are still trying to teach the market in 2026. What are we doing over here?
You said the word standardization, and that is huge in forensics, and that is what the forensics community and even the federal government have been trying to get involved with creating standardization. But I will tell you this, being a part of it, there is no governing body that says you have to do anything. So everybody's trying to create these standards, and unfortunately, sometimes agencies create standards when something bad happens. So we all know when there's change, is it because there are people being proactive or reactive, right? And unfortunately, most of the time, I've learned it's more reactive, okay? And so I would love to see more standardization in other fields as well.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, so we're gonna bounce around. I think I'll wait a little later. Keep the thing going. Let's talk about court. So you got this peer review, got it in, and it's and tell everybody how ballistics does not get into an examiner's hands until it goes to court, and tell the difference between. I want to make sure I got this right because of my memory recall. Like, we have a potential match and the systems that do the potential matches. And then when does it actually go to the examiners for that? Because everyone might think it's happening a lot earlier in the process, but unless it goes to court, it's probably not even getting that peer review until it goes to court. Is that right?
Well, you're absolutely right. And that leads into NIBIN. So we can talk about NIBIN now, or we can shelf it for
Hey, it's the tavern. We're going to go back and forth. And Pete's praying we stay to 2 hours, but I just don't see it happening.
There's so much to talk about. Tom, I was super nervous first joining the podcast. I'm like, 2 hours to just talk about stuff about what I do. I don't know how we're going to fill the time. It's already 45 minutes. I haven't even gotten through how I got to private work. Like
3 hours is going to feel like 10 minutes. Don't worry.
Right. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So we can either jump into NIBIN, or I can kind of speed past to that and talk.
Well, let's do this. Pete is involved in the NIBIN program from the administrator's ATF perspective. Pete, explain to everybody NIBIN, the acronym that it is, and we all know the federal government loves their acronyms. Boy, they can't get enough of those. And so it's a name, but it's also an acronym. It stands for stuff. So Pete, an overview of NIBIN right now is really perfect. And then how it works from the ATF and the government, and then how people like Stephanie feed the information into it, and all the brilliance that comes from the people like Stephanie and her team.
Sure. It's the National Integrated Ballistics Identification Network. And what it does is it looks at the markings on spent shells, ejector markings, the firing pin strike into the primer, and it identifies similarities like fingerprints. And That's how they tie the firearm to not only spent shells, but spent shells from one crime scene to another. The interesting thing is that NIBIN for years was mismanaged by ATF because it was viewed exclusively as a forensics tool, not as an intelligence tool. It wasn't until around 2015 where some agents started using those linkages to put cases together and go out and make, prosecutions, tying scenes together, going after, again, what we now call the trigger pullers. But for years, it was something that was just viewed as a step that had to be taken before the case went to trial. I can tell you that when I was up in Canada as the liaison, which was from 2012 to 2014, they have SIBIN, same thing, just C is for Canada. And the prosecutors up there exclusively viewed it as exactly that, a step in the process. And they fought tooth and nail to not have NIBIN or SIBIN used the way NIBIN is, where it's used to gather intelligence and to put those test fires in there right away. They wanted it to wait until the eve of trial. And we would try to educate them. That's not the time that you want to find out you have a serial shooter, as you're about to take that knucklehead to trial in a week. So, but yeah, some forward-thinking agents decided to look at it as an intelligence tool and had some really great success. And then the agency more broadly started to realize, hey, this is an intelligence tool. And that's when it changed from, again, being something that was just viewed as part of the process into something that's used proactively.
Yeah, and that's funny that you bring that up, is because when I was in Alabama, we're taught about NIBIN, but it was on the back end. It was on the back end of, even when evidence came to us, it was on the back end of our work as well. And so what happened was, then when we released something called the lead, basically case connections from the cartridge cases seen at different scenes, or gun at different scenes, to the connected via NIBIN. When we issued the leads, they were cold, and the investigators were like, okay, maybe that's great, but would have liked to know a year ago. Yeah. And so you're absolutely right. There was this push. There was this push around 2015 is officially when it came out, and I believe Denver was the first official Crime Gun Intelligence Center. But actually, people don't really know this, but New Orleans was doing the same work. So New Orleans, I've got a buddy who works at the New Orleans laboratory for NOPD, and he was part of doing a process where they were putting NIBIN on the front end when Denver was doing this as well. So they were trying it out in New Orleans, and come to find out, if they put the evidence, whether it's the gun, meaning you test fire the gun, you take the evidence cartridge case, you put that into NIBIN, or a cartridge case from a crime scene, you put it into NIBIN in the first 3 days after the shooting, the leads that were generating were actually more helpful. And so that was the push. And then for us on the forensics side, Pete, I'm sure you know this, that didn't hit officially till about 2018, 2019. Yes. When the ATF threw the gauntlet down with something called the MROS. And as Tommy said, ATF and the federal government, they love acronyms. So the MROS came out, the minimum required operating standards for NIBIN. So in the forensics world and in law enforcement, because now so many other agencies besides forensics had a NIBIN unit, which they actually called IBIS. The actual unit, the equipment itself is IBIS, and the network that ATF runs is called NIBIN. And I try to explain, because some people get a little confused still what I'm talking about when I talk about NIBIN. But think about DNA. Like, DNA has CODIS, and fingerprints has AFIS. Well, for guns, it's NIBIN, and ATF runs and controls that network. Okay, so in 2019, they put the gauntlet down, and they said, okay, guys, everyone that has a unit, you guys need to enter the evidence in within a set amount of hours. Okay, and what was kind of gray was it hours after the crime? Was it hours after it was, submitted to the laboratory, or, taken into evidence? Or was it hours after, the detective or the firearms examiner picked it up? That was a little gray, but I will say since then, we have seen a huge change in investigations. And especially, I've witnessed the countless leads that have gone out within just a few hours of being entered. And so NIBIN is pretty impressive. It's near and dear to me for a few reasons. One, so the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, they have a NIBIN unit now. I was actually able to get it funded. And what was really cool was, and we were the first in the country to do this, but I asked HIDA, I'm sure you guys are familiar with a HIDA, but Houston HIDA, because Texas has a ton of HIDAs, but I asked HIDA if they would fund a NIBIN unit for the sheriff's office, because, you know, it's a very, very expensive unit and network, about $400,000, you know, for all, you know, all the pieces to come together. And so they were able to fund us that and for years of maintenance. And so then in 2018, when we got it, we became the largest connection in the U.S. to be connected by all the NIBIN units. So where we were in Montgomery County and all the other units, that was the largest by like square mile in the country to be connected. So not only is it near and dear to me there because I was able to get that for the agency, but then when I joined Vigilant, Tom, we worked hand in hand and side by side with NIBIN, you know, with our ballistic search or ballistics IQ product. So,
okay, the thing you mentioned, New Orleans, Mike Eberhardt was the agent, the first agent to start putting those cases together. So, I mean, he was the first person to realize that they can utilize that as a you know, a proactive measure to go after people using guns. So that was number one. But yeah,
isn't he originally from Oklahoma?
Yeah.
Look at how everything tends to connect.
It always does. It's such a small world, Pete. And it's so funny you bring him up because he was the chief when I got my NIBIN unit. And we had a little issue with contractors, you know, getting it installed because it's a process. And so he was at a meeting in West Virginia, I think it was, when I saw him, didn't know this man at all. And if you know me, like, it doesn't matter who it is. Like, I go and talk to anybody, okay? Not realizing he's the chief of NIBIN for the ATF, but I knew he worked for ATF. And so I was like, hey, excuse me, we're having some problems. He's like, well, where are you from? I'm like, Montgomery County. He's like, oh, I've heard about you. And then we started chatting, found out he was from Oklahoma. I went to, you know, I was in Oklahoma, and he helped like speed up the process for my NIBIN installation. But not only that, because of the kind of hiccups we had, the ATF gave us some contractors, some shearwater contractors to actually enter NIBIN evidence. So it's funny that you bring up Mike.
Yeah. So, all right, let's go back. I'm sorry, Pete, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, the other thing is I felt your pain because when I was in charge of the ATF Miami office, we wanted our NIBIN evidence to put in a timely manner. We had a delay of some shells weren't going in for 18 months. And the lab director down there, who turned out to be wonderful, Stephanie Luehr, was fighting us tooth and nail because they're accredited, and to change their process, you know, is like moving heaven and earth. And we actually had a gentleman named Mike Garvey from the Philadelphia Police Lab come down. Yeah, and he persuaded Stephanie to change their policy so that they can maintain being in compliance and then keep accreditation while getting the entry time down to about 3 days. When I left Miami, I don't know what it is now. I know they want it within 24 hours, which in many places is an impossibility, but yeah.
So I want to provide some color to the commentary because although, and it is really important to hear all of this and the structure, and I need all of the I need the law enforcement folks who are not in this space to understand how much work it takes behind the scenes. And then the people who are not sworn or were not associated with law enforcement are true crime folks who might be listening. It's a lot of work and bureaucracy on the back end as well. But Stephanie brought up a HIDA, another acronym, high intensity drug trafficking areas. Pete, how many? 70, 60, 70? How many of them? How many HIDAs are there across the country?
I believe there's over 70, and they are run by the Office of National Drug Control Policy, which is run by the Drug Czar, which is currently Sarah Carter. But yeah, they're great sources of, I hate to say it, they're great sources of money for local law enforcement and even sometimes federal agencies because they're very well funded.
Yep. So HIDA, high intensity drug trafficking area. I want to make sure everyone understands that. And the great former chief of department of the NYPD, Lou Anamone, who will be a future Ten-Four Tavern guest in May at CompStat in his responsibility and accountability meetings to his commanders. He said, if you don't have a motive, then you act as if it's drug related until you prove otherwise. And I found that to be pretty prophetic because more often than not, it was true. The drugs, the gangs drive the violence unless there's something else going on. And the reason why what Stephanie said is important to me and important to her is they knew to help her fund her project because the drugs and the gangs are driving the violence. And Stephanie's team has a mission to curb and suppress the violence. So, yeah. But I want to get into a couple before we go. 92 Charlie wants to talk about, does every firearm have their striations? We'll talk about lands and grooves and all that stuff, tool marks and firing pin and ejector marks, and we'll talk about all those. Stephanie's going to get into definitely some CSI stuff. How do we know like which firearm casing came from? That's the same thing. We'll get into that. Firing pin impact. So all the questions are coming in on the forensics for ballistics, bullets and casings. They're different. We're going to talk about, as a reminder, we mentioned at the beginning, the Charlie Kirk ballistic evidence that is publicly available. We do not have access to the inside secrets. And we'll get into that as well. So, all right. So Stephanie, like that's where you are, Montgomery County. You built this lab. Were you still consulting when we got together at Vigilant?
So I heard about your project in the summer, I would say, of 2019. And then I left the sheriff's office at the end of 2019. So it started right there when I heard about your project to when I left the sheriff's office to go full-time.
Yeah. So just so everyone knows, a quick thing, Stephanie and I, where we got to know each other was at a company. We have a mutual friend, Rocky Edwards, another firearms and tool mark. What's the title?
Examiner, yeah.
Quality something or other, whatever, right? Because we kept it short when we were FTE, firearms.
Firearms examiners is fine. So not everybody in firearms does quality management. That's a specialty I hold. Not a lot of people in firearms have that at all. Yeah. But they're either a firearms examiner or they're a firearms and tool mark examiner. So we can just say firearms examiner. Right.
So Stephanie and I, with another team members, worked on a project to try to accelerate the lead generation into the field as fast as possible. What Stephanie was previously talking about, what is 24 hours? What is 20, like from what point in time? The bottom line is from a former detective commander working a criminal investigative unit who responds to shootings, firearms, homicide cases, all of that stuff. I will tell you, in 1999, I received ballistic comparison matches after the case was already adjudicated.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And that was in 1999. So in 2016, 17, 18, we were trying to figure out how to do that. That technology eventually went from a company that we worked for. Stephanie moved on. I moved on. It went somewhere else. And it's now back at a company called Forensic Technologies, which is still the provider of technology to law enforcement. So that technology that Stephanie and I worked on together is now back in the main company. He's got the major, and then it all goes full cycle. I just knocked my lamp over.
Crazy.
It's okay. It's all good. But here's my point. Guys like Pete, Stephanie, people like you, me, we're all trying to solve a problem. We want to take the worst of the worst offenders off the street. And sometimes they work out better. The technology works out better. Facial recognition, license plate readers, all the new technologies, call detail records and geolocation services on cell phones that I never worked on now, but I still understand. All of these, we're all trying to work towards the same thing, getting the worst of the worst offenders off the street as fast as possible. So with that, Stephanie, you were there and you go back into the market. You build SCL Forensics. Look at you, the entrepreneur that you are. You got a consulting. Tell us what that is, what your business looks like right now, and then we're going to do the CSI stuff. Does that sound good for you guys?
Perfect. Yeah, because we got to get back to Charlie's answer or question. I definitely want to tell people how we do what we do. So then 2019, I got an awesome opportunity, as Tom alluded to, from a colleague named Rocky Edwards. And he basically had an idea that Tom kind of initialized. And so I started SCL Forensics, a private forensics consulting and contracting company that specialized in firearm identification and quality management at the end of 2019. And then, so I worked with the technology that Tom and I are talking about for a couple of years. And then in early 2022, I completely went off on my own. So I left the previous company that I helped start, and I started completely on my own with no other investors, just me and my amazing team. And so what we do at SCL Forensics is we offer assistance with firearms and toolmark casework. So we can go on site to agencies and help work casework, you know, if they're backlogged or down examiners. Also, we have laboratories, you know, built in. And if you kind of look where I'm at, like you can see a little bit of my setup here. So we can work cases remotely as well. Additionally, we do a lot of training. Okay, I will say right now, especially, my field is hurting a lot because the experience, the big chunk of experience is retiring right now. And so there is a push for new examiners. And so we do a lot of training of new examiners or current examiners who need like continued education. And then also I do things like start new laboratories. If there's an agency that wants to start a new firearms unit, we'll come in and help them from start to finish. And then also help them with accreditation. There are some agencies, because like I said, in Texas, you have to be accredited to work firearms evidence for court purposes, all right? But in other states, there's not that requirement. So other states, you know, with laboratories or sections that are not accredited, if they choose to go towards accreditation, we'll be able to assist them with that. Then also the hot topic in my field is 3D technology, 3D instrumentation, okay? And so there are a couple of companies that offer these instruments, and in our world, you have to validate equipment before it goes into casework. You need to see what it can do, and you need to essentially do an experiment. And so we offer the validation of the 3D equipment. And then lastly, you know, I assist not only law enforcement, but I also assist the defense team. So, you know, defense need to have firearms experts. And I will say, from working in law enforcement and on the prosecution side or in government, sometimes we'll look at defense experts as like, you know, or defense attorneys as, you know, maybe not as knowledgeable, and that's because some hire people who are not experts in what we do. So maybe they hired that gunsmith, maybe they hired that firearm expert, but they didn't hire the firearm and toolmark expert. So I also work on the defense side, and I do other things like I help with increasing efficiency in current sections, do audits of current sections, you know, looking at cases that have already been done, you know, try to, like, jack of all trades, but help out wherever we can.
Well, hold on, Steph. We got to interrupt because Nolan, being the detective that he is, said there's a creature in the background. He wants to know if it's a small cow. So what do we got going on? Who's that?
Guys, that is Lily. Okay. If I put her up, you would hear her just scratching at a door. Lily is a French bulldog. And I'm sorry, I let her in here because I thought she would be at least the least problematic if she was laying in her bed over here. But she's all just like digging a little pallet over here in her bed. So That's Lily. She says hello. Hey, Lily. Yeah.
Come on, Lily. No, we're so anyone who follows our Ten-Four Tavern social media, Moxie and Maisie are stars of my social media promos. So we encourage dogs and pets and cats and whatever else you got. I have a surprise promo coming up soon. I can't divulge it because I don't want to let it out, but I have an animal. We love animals and all that kind of good stuff. So we were happy to have Lily come on, and Stephanie asked if she should lock her out, and we said no. If she comes through, she crashes. It's the tavern. Anything goes. We are generally tame here, but if it goes wild, we're okay with that too, because it's the tavern, and it, you know, I mean, it's kind of like in the Bronx Tale when like all the motorcycle gang come in and Chaz Palminteri. Like, I mean, we might have a brawl one day, and we might have to beat up all the bikers and stuff, or maybe the bikers beat us up. But it is a tavern.
A Bronx Tale? Did you say A Bronx Tale? The movie.
A Bronx Tale, yeah.
A great movie. What's his name?
Colegio.
Oh, yeah, but the problem is, you know who that is? You know the history behind that guy, right?
Yeah.
Lilo Brancato was involved in a burglary. He wasn't the trigger puller, but his partner shot and killed Daniel Ashantagay in the Bronx. And so that's a very interesting place. People are very divided on how much he should pay for that, and does he ever get a chance? I actually had a retired cop tell me he deserves a second chance. As much as that was, I'm like, I'm not so sure I can make that level of, I don't know, Pete, like you probably are tied to that as well, being the North Bronx guy and Yonkers. He's on the pay no mind list, Nolan. Yeah, it's bad. But yeah, great movie. And he screwed it all up. He screwed his life up. He got into drugs, and then he was in the worst possible scenario, which ties perfectly back to firearms and ballistics, because Daniel Ashantagay was shot and killed. So let's get into let's go do some CSI stuff, because I think.
Why don't we answer that question that Stephanie wanted to answer, since we had a question from.
I'm sorry, Pete, speak up.
Yeah, why don't we let Stephanie answer the question that was asked about how we can tie the bullet to the gun, or the shell to the gun. I know that's came
Yeah,
out.
let's do it.
Okay, so just a little bit of Firearms 101. So basically, how do we link bullets and cartridge cases back to a specific firearm? All right, so that's the question. So essentially, every firearm is unique. Okay, every firearm is unique. I say it's like a fingerprint. You know, everybody has an individual fingerprint. Every tool, every firearm is unique. And that is because during the manufacturing process of parts of the gun that actually touch the ammunition component, the tool that is used to cut, shape, form that part, it changes ever so slightly from one to the next, to the next, to the next. So even a barrel that has been rifled, and there's 10 barrels behind it that's being rifled by the same tool, there will be microscopic changes, you know, that allow us to identify using individual characteristics. So every firearm possesses individual characteristics, and they can be imparted on firearm components, or ammunition components, such as your bullet, or your cartridge case, or your shot shell, or your wadding. And so through those individual characteristics, we are able to link specific evidence. Now, additionally, like through your use of your firearm, your abuse, maybe corrosion of the gun, individual marks can be left on as well. So let's say you never clean your gun, or let's say it ends up rusting. That rust or that buildup of material over time can cause individuality. And so those individual markings, now just talking about bullets, they're called striations, okay? They resemble scratch marks. They look like scratch marks on bullets. And we use a comparison microscope. You can kind of see this in the background. So this is our main tool. So I will say in firearms, there's not a lot of instrumentation like in DNA and drug chemistry or toxicology. But in firearms, we have like our eyes, our brain, and our comparison microscope. So essentially what we do, I'll just give you just a quick overview of, you know, how I would work a case. Let's say there was a bullet recovered from autopsy, okay? And then there was a suspect and a gun recovered from the suspect. So the investigator wants to know, was this the gun that fired the bullet? Now, again, I am not responsible, nor is anybody in my field responsible for putting the gun in that person's hand. That's Tom's side, okay? I am just responsible for the evidence. So I don't care, and I don't have a dog in the fight, whether the evidence says one thing or the other. It excludes or includes the suspect. It doesn't matter to me at all. And most of the time, we don't even have case information. We find that out at the end of it. But anyway, so what I'll do is I will work up the firearm by itself. So I will do an examination of a gun. I will test it for its operability. I will take down data, make, model, caliber, serial number. I'll see what safeties are on the firearm, if they work. Sometimes we do a trigger pull. That's the amount of force required to pull the trigger of that gun, and it's reported in pounds. And then I will test fire the gun to obtain known test fire bullets and cartridge cases. Then I have my bullet recovered from autopsy. I'm going to work up the bullet independently, okay? And I'm going to take down some we call it objective data. I'm going to determine the caliber, how many number of lands and grooves. That's the rifling in a barrel. So the rifling imparts spin on the bullet, okay? And it's composed of lands and grooves. So you can have a different number of lands and grooves in the barrel of the gun. There could be 3, or there could be 8, or there could be 22. The manufacturer decides that. And there could be a twist that goes to the right or goes to the left. So I'm documenting all this data of the bullet. And if the bullet and the gun share the same, what we call class characteristics, the same information, then I'll go to the microscopic stage, okay? So let's say I determine my bullet was a 45 auto, all right? But my gun is a 9mm Luger. I don't even have to go to the microscope stage because I know that a 45 auto bullet cannot be fired in a 9mm Luger gun. But if my bullet is consistent with a 9mm Luger, then I'm going to go to the microscopic stage, all right? And I'm going to look, essentially, for a grouping of these repetitive striations in the same location of both items of evidence. So, essentially, I'm looking for a pattern. We are called pattern matchers. And so, and that is what is very different in my field versus, let's say, DNA. Latent prints and firearms use and employ pattern matching, okay? And it is us that creates our conclusion. So if I found what I call sufficient agreement of individual characteristics, I can report out an identification, meaning that that bullet was fired through the barrel of the submitted gun. Then, again, before that report goes out, I have an independent expert come in, and they will verify the conclusions independently without my information knowing my result at all. If we come to the same conclusion, then it gets peer reviewed and the case gets reported out. But so to answer that question is every gun is unique, okay? And it leaves those individual markings, whether it's on the bullet or the cartridge case. Now the cartridge case is a little more interesting. And Pete kind of already brought up with NIBIN, what NIBIN looks at. But so there are a lot of areas on a cartridge case that us as examiners can look at. The one that everyone knows of is the firing pin impression, right?
Can we stop?
Yeah.
Steph, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but what's the percentage for the audience? What is the percentage of bullets versus fired cartridge cases? And then 92 Charlie has an interesting, he calls it spent. We call them FCCs, right? Fired cartridge cases. Is that the right terminology? Because I don't want to get beat up by Stephanie.
I'm proud of you. That's another thing.
All right. However, what's the percentage of fired cartridge cases versus bullets? And then this is an interesting question, 92 Charlie. He believes that every law enforcement firearm is test fired, and then somebody saves a fired cartridge case for future comparisons.
No, but I will tell you this, okay? What he is talking about is what Glock does. Glock does this. You are right with Glock. Now, that is a manufacturer of a firearm. It is a very well-known manufacturer. It's probably the most common firearm out there is Glock. And Glock test fires the gun. Every manufacturer test fires them before, but Glock submits the fired cartridge case with the gun they sell. Okay, but it's not put in a national database.
Not a national database, but Nolan's saying not true. And yes for Glock, but could an individual agency do that before they admit?
I've never heard of that. I have never heard of that. Like, for instance,
but you've never done a case where the agency came out and said, "Match, we've already got Tommy Joyce has got a Glock 19, blah blah blah, and he got into a shooting, and here it is." And I know you've never heard where the agency provided a sample to do a comparison?
I have. I absolutely have.
Oh, wait. Okay. So that's interesting.
I have. So, but just going back, like, I've worked so many officer-involved shootings, and we're instructed not to put their guns into NIBIN. Okay. The only time it would be is if there's investigative information. So maybe if that officer committed a crime on his off time, right? Then that gun, if it was his duty weapon, would go into NIBIN or possible.
Pete, I want to go to Pete. Go to Pete. Can you
no,
speak to any of this?
I've heard rumors that some agencies have done this. There was talk even within ATF that someone had done this. I think sometimes it's misinformation. It's put out there to encourage people not to be stupid with their firearms. But yeah, I don't know of any agencies that actually catalog spent shells to have on hand in case one of their officers' weapons is used in some sort of pattern of crimes. I've heard rumors.
There could be an agency that we don't know about that does this, but I will tell you, from every law or government forensic laboratory, we don't put them in, okay? And I don't know of any law enforcement agency that puts them in at all. So I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, so I'm going to do one more question, and then I'm going to address something that I heard, my question. So does cleaning your firearm barrel affect rifling of that barrel, right? And then what I remember in my education journey with you and Rocky and the team was that there are distinct differences between the first fired cartridge case of 18, say 17 or 18 discharge than the last one, because the temperature changes cold to being heated up. Does that make sense? So in other words, I empty a magazine with 17 rounds in it. The first fired cartridge case might have variations in the tool marks than the last fired cartridge case in that same magazine.
Well, yeah, so that's what's frustrating, I will say, when it comes to fired cartridge cases. There's variability, okay? So whereas in our field, there's been tons of research that shows you can ID a gun after it's been fired 500 times, 1,000 times, and more. However, there are things such as what you're talking about, whether the gun is hot or cold. So there could be a little bit of variability with the individual markings, like such as a firing pin drag, okay? There are some guns, some recoil-operated firearms have something called a firing pin drag. Great that you bring it up. These two pictures right here. So the impression you see on these two pictures, that's the firing pin impression from the firing pin, okay? And then if you see a little triangle on like the right side, I call it the 3 o'clock side, that's the firing pin drag. And essentially the firing pin was protruding from the hole of the gun's breech face. We call it an aperture. And it was protruding when the barrel dropped. Okay, and then the cartridge case was extracted, so it creates a drag. Well, guess what? When that gun is fired 10 times or 5 times, there might not always be a drag, okay? And what you see, there's markings outside the firing pin impression, we call them breech face markings. So when the gun is discharged, okay, the cartridge case will slam up against the breech area of the gun and can impart the breech face marking. And so that's what also NIBIN picks up. Not only is the firing pin impression, but can pick up the breech face markings as well. And those breech face markings can have a little bit of variety from one shot to the next. Now, to answer, I don't know whose question it was about cleaning a barrel, can it alter the markings? 92 absolutely can. If you're using a harder material brush, and you could absolutely alter the markings of your gun. You know, if you went in with something like, most barrels are made of steel, and so if you go in with a brush that is, you know, very abrasive, you could alter it. But most cleaning, most brushes, you're not going to alter anything significantly. You know, but you can damage your firearm during the cleaning process, absolutely, if you're not careful. Now, what you're looking at right now, so this is a great side-by-side comparison picture, okay? And what we're looking at, those are striations. So there are striations on bullets, but then there's also striations on cartridge cases. So What we're looking at is called the firing pin aperture shear. Okay, so when the firing pin hits the primer of the cartridge case, you have that impression. So the area surrounding is called, of the firing pin, is the aperture. Now, in some cases, the metal will flow back in the hole and create this raised aperture mark. Now, the scratch marks or striations you see is caused from the edge of that hole. So the aperture, where the aperture meets the breech face, okay, and then the cartridge case essentially being extracted and ejected from the gun, it will scratch those surfaces and create an aperture shear mark. And what you're looking at on the right hand, where it looks like brass material, like yellow material, that is an actual test-fired cartridge case, okay? And on the left hand, that is a casting of a cartridge case. Okay, so that's why it's red. So don't worry about it. But it's just two different cartridge cases that we're looking at. And we're trying to see if there is sufficient agreement of those individual markings. And if you guys can see right now, the pattern of those individual striations, there is enough in that area that I would probably call an identification. Now, it wouldn't be reported out because it has to get reviewed, verified, then reviewed. But just by looking at this, and this is actually one of my pictures, this was an identification. So you're looking at the aperture shear mark.
Right. So 92 Charlie, really appreciate the input. I appreciate that you guys finding this fascinating. For those of you who are only listening and not watching, unfortunately, there are some really good images that are really cool. And I think you can see what it looks like under a microscope. But all of this is the science behind the scenes. But I think there's, Pete, you were saying there's some other, like all of this is working behind the scenes, but what's going out there?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of things happening in the world of crime gun intelligence. We're talking about NIBIN. Obviously, ShotSpotter is a part of this world as well. Problematic in some places because, like in Chicago, they're getting rid of ShotSpotter. So you have shots being fired, right? And no one calls 911. If you're a person that gets shot, you got a big problem. You're laying in the street bleeding and help's not coming. But I mean, the other thing is, I mean, you respond to those things, you're picking up evidence. And a lot of folks don't realize the same person that's firing a gun at the blue mailbox on the corner because they're test firing it, that might generate a 911 call with a partial license plate. That's real helpful when you have a spent shell from that same gun turning up next to a body where you have nothing. You know, so I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there. ShotSpotter, you have NIBIN, you have the tracing, E-Trace, so that you can trace the source of the firearms. It all factors in together. But Stephanie, tell us about, like, what's the craziest case that you've had involving ballistics, having put the puzzle pieces together and helping law enforcement put somebody in handcuffs?
Sure. So, there are a lot of different cases I've worked where the evidence is super interesting, but the story might not be interesting. But then there are some that the story is really interesting and memorable. So I'll just tell you a couple of big ones for me. So Tom had mentioned, why we jumped into NIBIN was, so when cases are connected through NIBIN, it's called an investigative lead, okay? That cannot go to court. The officer cannot take that NIBIN report and go to court. They have to then submit the evidence to the firearms examiner so they do a physical comparison using our comparison microscope, all right? And then if an identification is made, that report will go out into court. So I've worked quite a few cases. And since I am a contractor, I obviously don't just work in my area, but I work all over the U.S. and even a little internationally. And I've worked a couple of cases in Texas and in the state of Maryland where NIBIN was a huge part of it. And we connected cases from different agencies. So like 7 and 10 cases involved, and these were cases that were, kind of non-violent cases. So might have been shooting into an unoccupied dwelling or shooting into a vehicle, all the way up to homicide. And I will say this right now, and you guys will probably agree, we'd have a lot more homicides on our hands if people were better shots. People are horrible shots. And this is why I believe you had asked before, like, what's the percentage of bullets versus cartridge cases that we see? I see way more cartridge cases than bullets. And that's because bullets are difficult to find. They, you know, if they impact the target, were they even collected and submitted? Okay. Or sometimes the bullet fragments and goes everywhere. We can't find it. So we see way more cartridge cases because they're typically left at the crime scene unless somebody picks them up or it's a revolver and they're in the chamber. But anyway, so I've had a lot of cases where connected violent crime, like homicide, to non-violent crime. And so we've all learned that people don't start off committing crime, you know, typically on their violent crime, they start off non-violent. And so I've worked a lot of cases like where 7 to 10 cases get involved and it's connected through NIBIN. And it was maybe a case that did not have any suspects that hit to a case that had suspects. And that's how the agencies talked, and that's how multiple crimes were solved with NIBIN and us. And so those were a couple of cool cases. I'd say in the Houston area, I did a couple, and Maryland, I've done quite a lot. There's this one case called a monster. I call it a monster case, and every examiner has it. Okay, it's the case that doesn't ever go away, and it was the biggest case I worked in my life. All right, and I think it was almost 10 cases connected, hundreds of pieces of evidence. All right, so it started from a NIBIN lead, but then there was so much more evidence to the case when we got the physical evidence, and it was just very, very difficult because there were so many different conclusions and so many different case numbers and item numbers. And so when, you know, we even went to court, like I had to do a PowerPoint for the jury to be able to color code things and put pictures because it was so complex. But so I would say those are kind of NIBIN cases I've dealt with. But as far as like cool cases, like you want to hear about, so I've worked a couple of high profile cases, all examiners have, some that have hit the news, and every case I'm about to talk about has been adjudicated, but I'm not going to name like such specifics.
Yeah,
but,
you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. But those monster cases, just for the record, I think I can speak to the sworn. Those are the cases that keep on giving, and they're money makers, and we're not happy that they happened, but they did happen, and we just keep working them. And I know the detectives never go home, and they put everything. And I worked on cases that, you know, the faucet stopped, and the job said, no, stop, it's enough. And the detectives still kept working on them anyway. So there are those too, but it is the tavern. So we like to, you know, tongue in cheek, like say we like those big cases because we do make money on, and they keep on giving. But I do believe that the true detectives like a Pete and the ones that he worked with in the Bronx and I worked with in Brooklyn, when the faucet did stop, they still kept working on their own time to put these cases down for sure. But yeah, so give us a couple of monster cases, and if you can sensationalize them without names and everything. But if they've been sensationalized and we know what they are, that would be great. If not, it's okay. But interesting, funny, quirky, crazy. Sure. And I think the final thing I want to say is, Pete, and I want to get back to you with comprehensive collection, because the shots fired at the stop sign will eventually lead to a homicide. Anyone who doesn't think that's true, you're wrong. You're out there. Those cartridge cases are all over the street. They've been kicked down the sewer. They've been picked up and thrown in the garbage, and they will lead to a homicide if there was comprehensive collection. Pete will comment on that, but give us some funny, quirky, crazy, sensational cases, and then we'll get into that.
Sure. So probably the most notarized case that I've been a part of, there was a movie made out of it. For anybody who wants to watch the movie, so all you got to do is type in Angel Down, okay? And so this was a case where it was in Mobile County, and so this was a case where a politician was essentially, a councilman was essentially charged with the murder of his mistress, and her name was Angel Down, beautiful woman from the Gulf Shores area. So basically, it was undetermined at the time if it was a suicide or if it's a homicide. He was ultimately charged for her murder. And so the laboratory that I was with, we worked that case, and in the sense where we were given the gun and we were given the cartridge cases and the bullets recovered from her body, and we were asked to determine if if this was the gun that fired the bullets. But that was not really the question. That was just part of the investigation. Now, the investigation, it was sensationalized, one, because she was a beautiful girl, two, because it was a politician. And I will say that there was a lot of differing experts. So you had different medical examiners with different opinions coming on. One saying it was undetermined, they couldn't determine the cause of death, and another person says that it's a homicide. So ultimately, the charges were dropped, and then a case was actually refiled by a new DA. And so, because the family was pushing, they believed it was a homicide. But I did work that case, and to this day, it's a case where I honestly couldn't even tell you if it was a homicide or a suicide. That case blew me away. It was mostly the trial stuff that came out in the trial. So it wasn't even stuff that I did, or my colleague did. It was the sensationalization of what happened in court. So yeah, that was a big case.
Hold on one second. So for the audience, manner and cause of death, manner, homicide, suicide, accidental, Cuppy, Detective Nolan, circumstances under pending police investigation. I don't know if they still use that term, Cuppy. That's what I'm used to. Pete, that's what you're used to, I'm sure. They can go on for years. That's how you carry over homicides that are undetermined to the next year. That's a statistical thing, but we like to move those. But sometimes the detectives, they were working towards really trying to find that out. But Cuppy is another acronym. So this is the show of acronyms tonight, for sure. Circumstances under pending police investigation. And then that's the manner. Cause would be gunshot, would be strangulation, manual, ligature, whatever those cases are. So explain, if you can, Stephanie, explain how they would go from undetermined or accidental or suicide to a homicide. Like, where these determinations come from, they're way on opposite ends. Like, if I'm the case detective and I'm talking to the medical examiner, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to throw it out there, it's for another day, the George Floyd homicide, alleged homicide with Chauvin in Minneapolis, like there was no, like, that thing, that anyone who read that postmortem examination knows that this breaks all protocol on manner and cause of death. But that's for another day, another time. But manner and cause, like, how could these people be so far apart?
Yes, so obviously the case has to go to a grand jury, and the DA's office has to present evidence to where the jury felt like there was enough to go forward with the homicide, the murder trial. Okay, so that wasn't a debate. The debate was what you were talking about was the cause of death. Okay, so to my understanding, that had mostly to do with the investigation. So it's a little out of my expertise, but looking at the blood on her clothing, looking at the blood in his vehicle, because I will say in that case, her body was found in the driveway and he pulled out of the driveway. And so there are some that think that she went out there with her firearm, it was her firearm, and shot herself in the driveway. And then there are others that believe that, this individual, I won't name, but it's in a movie, you'll see it, that he was the one who fired the gun and then he left the scene. And so you had experts presenting the physical evidence, and then it was the interpretation that was up for discussion.
So Stephanie, this is fascinating to me, because when do you get pulled in as the examiner and this firearms piece versus the injuries to the woman? How many times she's been shot, what you think the range is, the trajectory, what direction, like if it's suicidal, like, do they go to the temple? Do they put it in their mouth? I'm sorry to be so graphic, folks, but like, where does your world collide with the medical examiner's world and like have these conversations? And the detective should be the quarterback pulling all of these things together, because their investigation and their findings from talking to the experts should be brought to pull this all together. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, I know what you're getting at. So not all examiners do muzzle to target distance, and that's what you're talking about, muzzle to target distance. We were a laboratory that did muzzle to target distance, and we did do this in this case. So basically, the agency, the investigative team came to us, and again, in the beginning, we typically know no information about the case. We don't need to know it. It doesn't change our results, and so we typically don't know anything. So to prevent kind of bias. However, in this case, we do need to know some information because we're doing a muzzle target distance determination. So we're trying to determine through an experiment how far away was the gunshot wound from the muzzle of the firearm. And so, yes, what we do was we can work with physical defects on the body. So the actual gunshot wound, the shape, the pattern of the wound. Is there stippling? You brought up stippling. You know, physical defects of the wound. Okay, or we can look at the gunpowder residues. Okay, so you heard of GSR. Well, GSR is actually broken up into two worlds: gunpowder residues and primer residues. Firearms examiners, and what I do, we don't do primer residues. That's when you take swabs off of people's hands and you're looking for GSR, but you're really looking for something called primer residues, and that uses a different tool called a scanning electron microscope. So firearms examiners, we don't touch that. What we look at is the physical defects on the body or gunpowder residue. So that means burned gunpowder, partially burned, unburned gunpowder, soot. So anything that comes out of the barrel of a gun that impacts the target, we will look at that. And we will do essentially a range determination based off of our calculations, whether I'm looking at clothing, and I'm looking at the defects, and I'm looking at the gunpowder residues, or we will use the medical examiner's autopsy report and their measurements to do a muzzle to target determination. And so that is done towards the beginning of the investigation. Now, our report might take a little while, as we all know, but we get that information pretty soon.
Interesting stuff.
Anything? Go ahead.
It's interesting stuff. You know, earlier when you were talking about projectiles, you talked about projectiles fragmenting.
Yeah.
Now, recently there was something on the news that got a lot of play, and that's reference to Charlie Kirk shooting. How shocked were you when they found out that they could not conclusively tie the projectile to the rifle? And what do you think that does to the case? Personally, I don't think it hurts the case at all. It's nice to have a pristine projectile, but you're an expert in the field. Your thoughts?
Yes. So family and friends have been asking me about this ever since the incident, and I'm sure every firearms examiner I know, their family and friends have been asking them. So I'm glad we kind of bring this up. And I just want to preference, you know, the information I'm talking about is information that was released on the media. So I am only talking about the results that are released on the media. I'm not talking about results that we don't know about. So I'm just going to tell you the results that were released. What does it mean? Okay. So there were a couple of things. First, you asked me, was I surprised? I actually wasn't. These caliber firearms, these rifles, they can be very difficult to possibly identify because of the microscopic marking and because of the jacket fragmenting and peeling back in such a manner. So sometimes these guns, these rifles, every gun has individual markings, but not every gun always imparts their individual markings the same, okay, which is frustrating, and sometimes why we have to test fire the gun multiple times, okay? And so I wasn't surprised. I don't think anybody in my field was really surprised. But what do the results mean? So first, we found out that the bullet in question was called a .30 caliber. So is that a gun? What does it mean? All right, so let me just break that down a little bit. So in our world, we issue calibers, and we will say a bullet is of a caliber class or a nominal class, and then we can give a specific caliber of the cartridge. Let me give you an example. All right, so a .40 Smith & Wesson is a caliber of a cartridge, but the caliber class or the nominal class is called .40, okay? So the way I explain this to the jury is the caliber class, like if you think back into like school days with science, you had like kingdom, genus, phylum, species, okay? And so, okay, we're bringing it back.
I know what, you're smarty pants, smarty pants.
Right. But look, I'm relating this, okay? So go with me, stick with me here. So imagine if you had like a family of cats. Okay, in that family of cats, you have all different species of cats. You can have a tiger, you have a leopard, a lion, a house cat. Okay, it doesn't matter. All right, so each one is from the same family, but they're all different species. Okay, so same with caliber. All right, you have the family caliber, the caliber class. So in this situation, it was a 30 caliber class, but it was not released exactly what caliber cartridge was used. So in that caliber class, you could have 30-06, you could have 308, you could have 7.32 by 39 millimeter, which is your AK-47, 300 Win Mag. So you have all these different specific caliber cartridges within the family, the caliber family. Okay, and so the caliber of cartridge was not specifically released, could have been due to the damage, or it could have been that lab policy that they only released the family. So that's first things first. So we have a 30 caliber bullet, all right? And then the result of the actual comparison of the bullet to the rifle was inconclusive. So what does that mean? All right, so in layman's terms, it could have or it could have not been. That's exactly what it means. It does not lean towards yes or towards no. It is truly inconclusive. It means that the bullet shares the same class characteristics. So the classes were similar. You know, it was a 30 caliber rifle, okay, and a 30 caliber bullet. So your class is the same. But on the microscopic stage, there was insufficient individual marking for that examiner to be able to say it was the gun or it wasn't the gun. So we can't take this conclusion and let it mislead anybody that it wasn't the gun, okay, or that it was the gun. We truly cannot say. There's no evidence for us to say it was the gun or it wasn't. So we have to report out inconclusive.
Sure. Right. So Pete, look, I just want to ask one question to you, Pete. Is like the stuff that came out in the media. Do you think it was sensational because they wanted to say it didn't match when we don't know that, and they want to create the conspiracy, right?
Minds. Yeah, the conspiracy theorists were losing their minds. I heard like people said, "Oh, there was an Egyptian plane that took off that day. It was the Mossad." I heard all kinds of crazy things. But look, the reality is, and some of this has been discussed either in congressional hearings or on TV, is that the shooter's DNA was found on the spent shell. The shooter's DNA was found on unfired shells in the rifle. The shooter's DNA was found on the rifle, to include in parts of the rifle that were covered by the stock, which means at some point he disassembled that rifle and put it back together. So, I mean,
the cartridge cases were also identified to the rifle. So the bullet was inconclusive, and the bullet is actually, you know, is considered the most important because unfortunately that's what was recovered from the victim. Right. But the cartridge cases, to my knowledge, were identified to that firearm as well.
Yes. So, I mean, look, it's still a good case, but you had all these people saying, "Oh my God, the case is falling apart." When that's just, look, it's people taking advantage of other people's ignorance. And look, I've had homicides where the bullet was so deformed they couldn't tie it definitively to the gun. And you had the confession, all kinds of other evidence. So I mean, we know this, Tommy, but the general public doesn't. And in this time where everything is a big conspiracy, that certainly doesn't help either, you know?
Yeah. So we never got it back. What's the percentage of bullets or projectiles versus fire cartridge case? So my 90-10 for fire cartridge cases, 85-15 maybe. Many more fire cartridge cases. Many more.
I'd probably say 70-30-ish.
Okay. You know, okay, just for the audience to hear that. No, you're working mostly with fire cartridge cases is where the meat and potatoes are to connect cases. So Pete, I want to go to you. Trigger pullers, comprehensive collection. And I want to do a shout out because we do have friends and I don't want them to think that they're not part of this podcast, but we have Pete Gagliardi, Ray Gadetti, and a whole bunch of Mike Garvey in Philadelphia. We have a whole slew of people who are working in this space. We mentioned Mike Eberhardt. And if we only mention Mike, the Raging Cajun from or Oklahoman, whatever he is. That's the other guy. That's the politician guy, right? Never mind. Like I want to give a shout out to Pete Gagliardi because he was probably the first and foremost. So give those guys a shout out. You worked with those guys when you were still at ATF, and then setting that tone for what the rest of the country should be doing in comprehensive collection versus what is really been doing? And then with 15 minutes left, we're going to go back to Stephanie and SCL Forensics and her work in international. And then if there's anything else, we'll start wrapping up. But Pete may cash in and press off and then close out, and then you and I will just have to keep going into the night. But anyway, comprehensive collection. Shout out to the folks who are good, true pioneers. And I will give a shout out to the New Jersey State Police too. I think as a state agency, they're one of, if not the leader in gun crime and NIBIN. But Pete, you know this space better than anybody. And all those players.
I would argue that every projectile that's, or rather every spent shell found after a 911 call should be placed into NIBIN, right? Whether it's shooting at a stop sign or some kid on the project roof shooting at the air conditioning ducts or whatever, because at some point that address where that location happened might be of value. For example, like again, somebody shooting on the roof of 877 Story Avenue in the Bronx, which is in the Monroe projects, right? And later on, you know, they're shooting at the air conditioning duct because they just got their brand new gun. And you put that into the system. And then 6 months later, right, there's a shooting. And by happenstance, one of the names that comes up in your investigation is a guy that lives at 877 Story Avenue. That's an important piece of information that you have. The problem is, as we've seen, is you have people that like to kick their shells into the sewers, think they're playing air hockey. There are departments that won't take a gun. Right, when they say crime gun, they define it as specifically that, a gun that's found during an arrest or involved in a crime. So if the gun is found on the side of the road as a discarded weapon, they won't put that projectile into NIBIN. Well, maybe the person threw it out the window for a reason. I mean, I've seen all different kinds of excuses from police organizations in a variety of different states, and it's really unfortunate because it could be that one little piece of evidence that solves a case. You know. I get it. It's a lot of work. You know, you need to store these things in evidence. I understand why some folks would be reluctant to doing it. And look, the other thing that happens with NIBIN is politics too. I've seen agencies that don't want to put stuff into the computer because they don't want other agencies in their area to be able to bounce off their evidence. Little inside baseball, Monroe County, which is the Keys, the beautiful Florida Keys, had some sort of an issue with the Miami-Dade lab, so they would drive their shells all the way up to Hillsborough County in Tampa because they didn't want to put their evidence into the Miami-Dade lab, which, again, politics. So, I mean, there's so many things that screw it up, but the reality is it's a potential piece of evidence in a case, and it could be that little tiny thread that breaks open a very important case, to include the killing of a child or the killing of a police officer. So it doesn't make any sense to me. It's in some instances it's political, some instances it's laziness, sometimes a little bit of both.
What about volume?
Look, I get it. You know, that's an issue, you know, in some places. But Tommy, we don't have the shootings like we used to have either. You know, things are getting more violent again, but I mean, it's not like the 1990s in the Bronx, late 80s when crack hit the streets and you had shootings all the time. You know, again, there's no excuse.
I will say the majority of cases that come into the laboratory are like less than 10 cartridge cases a case. I will say the majority. You know, every once in a while you have the ones with AR-15s and AK-47s that'll come in with like the 30s and 40s because the magazines hold more capacity and there's multiple magazines. And we'll get those quite, you know, often, but majority of evidence that comes in is probably less than 10 cartridge cases.
Okay, so that opens up a conversation. Quick question, quick answer. Most cartridge cases ever processed at a crime scene. How many cartridge cases? What's your biggest one?
252.
252 cartridge cases at one crime scene. How many firearms?
4. It was an officer-involved shooting.
Okay, but still. What about non-officer involved, where the thugs are ripping rounds? Most cartridge cases. How many firearms in a gun battle?
At a single scene or connected by NIBIN?
First single scene, and then ultimately most cases connected.
At a single scene, I would say the most that I've seen, probably a little over 100, maybe like 100-ish, 100. 105. and I think there were 3 guns involved. I think 3, possibly 4. But then, like I was talking about the monster cases that I've worked, cases with 10 connections and 300 pieces of evidence, of cartridge cases. I've got a buddy in New York that, his volume, New York's volume, like he's worked cases that are like 15 and 20 case connections, and the volume in the hundreds. So it just really depends. And I will say again, like, thankfully, these criminals are not great shots. So they're not mostly all homicides.
All right, so that's a really important point because we talk about crimes, and so law enforcement agencies do not count shootings where there's a trigger pull, a firearm is discharged, nobody hit. It's like it's a shots fired job, but it's not a UCR crime. And then we, as the detectives and the cops, have always said the only difference between that and a homicide is aim.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Unless it's at the stop sign, which is, we're not trying to, say those things are. But if you know that shot was fired at somebody and nobody was hit, and the fact that it was only a crime as shots fired, not an attempted murder, is pretty. It's not really cool. It's not really cool. That was an attempted murder. They just, thank God, their aim. They were like cross-eyed, But so anyway, Mike King, previous Ten-Four Tavern guest, great investigator from Utah. Always a great conversation, fellas. Great guest. So if you know Mike King, Stephanie, he's a wonderful guy. You should be a guest on his show. He does all the true crime stuff. He's got Garden of Evil, and he's got his podcast. Over 250,000 subscribers, true crime. He's probably one of the most thoughtful investigators this country has ever seen. So we really love Mike. Appreciate it. And he came on, I think it was episode 6 or 7 or something like that. Those trigger pullers, more cartridge cases, more evidence connected, more evidence submitted means more evidence connected. And you can solve those cases for sure. Any other crazy cases? And we'll do some international stuff. So crazy cases, any final thoughts on that? And we'll go international.
Well, let me tell you about a crazy tool mark case, because we've been talking guns and guns and guns, but like there are crazy tool mark cases. So tool marks are often discounted a lot because mostly people think of tool marks as B&E stuff. So, burglaries, cutting or stealing copper wire. But I want to give you a case example where it was a violent crime with the tool mark case, and it actually was very helpful for an investigator. So I worked a case a while back where essentially an older gentleman was killed, and he was dismembered. So it was a dismemberment case, and his body parts started showing up on the river. And they were able to identify the body. And there was his wife who, had, I believe, dementia, and she was on a lot of medication. And then there was his stepson, so the wife's biological child. And in this case, I will tell you that what ended up happening was the stepson did kill his stepfather, shot him, but then dismembered him with a reciprocating saw. And the stepmother, she was on a lot of medication. She helped dispose of the body. She was not, I think, found competent at the time, but that's what happened. So the evidence that we received were bones, okay, and also cartilage. All right, so a lot of times we're asked to look at specifically knives. I will tell you, knives or saws when it comes to dismemberment cases. So when we first got the case, I did not have any kind of tools. All I had was the actual body part. And they wanted to know what kind of tool was used to dismember. So we were able to look at the evidence and tell them, the family of tools that they should be looking for. And then when they, you know, through their investigative information, they found their suspect, and they collected a ton of tools. And so this case actually took a very long time, because I will tell you with tool marks, why tool marks are very difficult, and people don't talk about them as much, is because they're very time consuming. So like I said, a gun is essentially a tool, but it can only be fired one way. The bullet comes out, you know, the end, and we look at the bullet in the cartridge case. But with tools, think about this: a knife, a crowbar, a screwdriver. How many different ways can you hold that tool?
Right, the angles and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. The angles, like Tom, from you to me, I'm holding that tool. And then you have tools where you can use different sides of the tool, like the hammer. You've got the face and the claw, you know, and so you have to, you know, spend so much time creating marks to see if you're even in the realm of the mark from the crime scene, like to even know if it is possibly the tool. So it takes a long time working tool mark cases typically, but that case was really interesting. We were actually able to identify the actual tool used for the dismemberment. And so I always like to highlight that one again, because, you know, a lot of people think that tool mark cases, you know, are low priority, and, you know, typically they can be, but like we work a lot to do with knives, on cartilage, we look at bones, yeah, so on, so on.
So what was the tool used? What kind of tool was it? A reciprocating saw?
Reciprocating saw.
Fuzzy saw, sawzall.
And I will tell you, this is probably the hardest tool to identify because of the repetitive motion and the multiple teeth. It is difficult.
So in addition to the tool marks, was there biological evidence on it as well? Perfect.
Yeah.
And then that was part of their inventory in their own garage or tool shed?
Yes. So there was DNA on the tools that identified to all the family members, but you know, it was in the household. So, but there was the victim's blood on things of the suspect. And then there was also a confession, but there was a lot of forensic evidence in this case. Yeah. I will say that.
Well, we certainly appreciate the expertise and contributions towards building the evidence towards crime. Any good homicide detective would appreciate that. Spend time in the lab, spend time with the medical examiners, talking it through, understanding, asking questions. Super fun. Let's get back to SCL. I understand you got some international stuff. So where have you consulted across the globe? Give everyone an overview on how you go from New York parents to Louisiana to Oklahoma, Alabama, Montgomery, Texas, but then you're all over the globe. And guess what? It's a tavern. We've all taken a break. So I'm listening in the background, but let's do it.
Yeah. So absolutely. So I was hired essentially by a third-party company.
I can't hear you.
Oh, can you not hear me?
No. I think Tommy, when he took his thing, must have.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Goodness.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm not on mute. I mean, I'm not on mute. Did Tom take my? I guess no one can hear me.
I'm gonna text him.
Yeah, I'll call him. That's weird. Yep, still nothing. Nope, still nothing. Sorry, guys, hold on. Detective Nolan says we can hear you. Everyone says we can hear you. So, Pete, maybe you can't hear me. All right, guys, I'm going to talk, but maybe Pete can't hear me. But you guys can hear me. So I'm going to continue talking then. So, yeah, I was contacted by a third party and to do work in Casablanca, Morocco.
It's a tavern. I had to go to the bathroom. Come on, guys. Come on. It's a tavern. I have to go to the bathroom. What, you don't go to the bathroom when you're in the tavern? Come on.
Can you hear me, Tom?
Yeah, we're great. I heard everything.
I can't hear Stephanie on my device.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And so the people in the chat were saying they could hear me, but Pete, you couldn't. So I was just now talking to myself and the listeners.
Are you in a Marriott or a Hilton, Pete?
I am in a Marriott.
Oh, Bonvoy. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
come on, let's get back international. Come on, Steph.
Yeah. So I actually was hired to start a firearms laboratory for Casablanca, Morocco. So their government, kind of like what the ATF or the FBI is for the U.S., their government agency was called the DGSN. The real name is very long, but it's just DGSN. And essentially the UN got involved. They hired a third party who contacted me, and my team and I, we went to Casablanca over, I would say, probably 14 months. I went 6 times, and we started a firearms unit. There was 2 other firearms units in the country, in Rabat and for a different agency, but they wanted one in Casablanca. And we were the first accredited firearms section in the country of Morocco. So I aided with them building the section. My team and I trained 5 people from scratch, and then we helped accredit the section.
Wow, so it's pretty wild. Like, have you done any other international, or is this the only country?
Currently, we are starting a contract with Qatar. So I'm excited about that, but I will say things that have been going on with the Middle East have slowed that down. And so that.
Where was that? Where did you say?
Qatar.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay. Great. So you're setting up I have a bunch of pictures. I don't know I couldn't tell which ones are which. So let's just go through them and walk me through those. So where is this? Which one's this?
Okay. So, so that is in a town called Chefchaouen, or known as the Blue City. So that's kind of northeastern Morocco. So I was there for weeks on end at a time. And so on the weekends, I had an amazing interpreter and driver that would take me and show me around places. And so this was the Blue City. And so we're on top of a hill at a mosque and overlooking as the sun came down. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Okay, and then what's going on here?
Okay, so I will tell you this, Morocco, I learned so much, and not only about the country and the government, but you know, their laws are very different than ours. I will tell you, their firearms examiners don't testify in court. There is the forensic report is, you know, is entered into court, and that's it. So there's no testimony at the time from forensic experts in Morocco. So these are the trainees that are now the examiners, and we had to get permission from the government. So even though we're a firearms unit, and I was there to build a firearms unit, you know, a unit, we had to get permission to work on guns. Okay, and so that took many months. And a lot of red tape behind it. And so this is at their laboratory in Rabat, which is the capital of Morocco. And we are actually at their range, their police academy range. And so this is the first time we were working there, probably 8 months before they ever touched a gun. And so we were working on the MP5. So that's specifically what they're holding right there is the MP5. And so I had them working up the functionality of the firearm, and then we test fired the firearm and obtain all the known bullets and cartridge cases.
Okay, more of that, same, more of the same. And that's a portable unit right there, right?
Yeah, I actually have one myself. So that is a bullet recovery tank. So you can shoot pistols into this. You don't want to shoot anything over, they say a 454, it's rated for. And so for us to collect the bullets, at the range, we use this device.
Yep. And the collection here, what's this?
Yeah, horrible picture of me I sent you. I didn't realize. Sorry, guys. I'm closing
Was
my eyes.
COVID?
Yes, this was during COVID. Yeah, well, that actually was 2024, but they still required us to wear masks specifically. So this is not during COVID. It was 2024. But what we're looking at right there is a fiberglass material that is in the tube. And so this is also another bullet recovery device that we have at the laboratory known as a cotton tube. And so it had fiberglass in it, which is can be dangerous, and so we all masked up to recover the bullets.
Got it. So okay, so I think we, unless there's more, I don't think there. I think that's all the international stuff I had. Then we have, I think this was Houston, and then we have Houston, Massachusetts. You're working in Massachusetts, so you're all over. And then Nolan, by the way, I think that was my golden retrievers barking in the background. Moxie and Maisie, for anyone who knows. But you know, it's the tavern, so
sweet babies. I can't believe we're already out of time because I didn't even.
Yeah, we're wrapping up. Pete's already texting me saying we're 5 minutes over. Let's go. So
yeah, you'll have to have me on again because I wanted to tell you guys about all the fun court stories.
Yeah. Yeah. So just where else are you still working around? Who are you helping out with? And then we'll wrap up, and then and then I do some housekeeping for about 5 minutes on the future shows and what's going on.
So currently I have contracts with the state of Wyoming, Rhode Island, Maryland. I work with the laboratory in Maryland, Massachusetts State Police. Love those guys. You talked about that. Firearms Unit, great group of guys there. Houston Forensic Science Center, Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. I've worked Chicago PD, Contra Costa County, in California. I've worked in Louisiana, Florida, Washington. Some great contracts. I'm actually just about to start a contract with the city of Austin. So I'm very thankful that work has been busy. You know, I chose an area of expertise that has great job security. There's always going to be gun crime.
So let's talk about this real quick. Did you do the research? You were given some homework. How many examiners are there, Toolmark, in the country and in the world? Do you know?
So this is difficult. I reached out to a lot of people to try to get this information, and so we don't have the exact stats, but I would say in the U.S. it's about 1,000 to 1,500 in the entire U.S. And that is not a lot when compared to other forensic disciplines such as DNA and drug chemistry. So firearms is a very small unit. And then it is an international unit, like at our annual conferences, you know, we have our association called AFTI, Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners. You know, there are 36 countries that are a part of that. So firearms is done all over across the globe. And, you know, thankfully to AFTI, I've met a lot of examiners from other countries. I think another thing you had asked me about male, female. I will say firearms started off by being a male dominant role, because it was cops that were firearms examiners and cops were more male. I will say where we are now, 2026, the females have entered the discipline.
Females have entered the chat?
Absolutely. And so, I mean, it is at least 50-50 now, at least.
Oh, that's good. Okay. I was not aware. I thought it would be a lot more. I thought it'd be like 80-20 maybe.
When I started, it was 20 years ago. You know, the females were really coming into it. And, you know, being in the South, working in the South, I had a hard time as a female, not by my colleagues, but by the court system.
Yeah, for sure. I get it. Ron Layson is writing, hey, Stephanie, come on the Executive Perspective podcast. We're not afraid of long-winded conversations. So that's a shout out to Pete. Okay. I'm just going to say they keep going there. Detective Nolan says, Stephanie, thank you for what you're doing. He's a shout out. He's a true detective through and through, investigator seeking justice. So, Steph, any final thoughts? Any last things? Oh, you got good real quick, good stories on courtroom and some of the bizarre antics that people have asked you to do in court.
Oh my God.
As a female, maybe not. I don't know. But as a female,
for those that are still listening, you get the juicy stuff right now. So again, being a female in firearms now, not a big deal at all. But when I entered it, especially in Mobile, there have been a few female firearms examiners before me, but not in Mobile. And so I will tell you that. So a couple of things that I've seen in different courtrooms over the years. And so I have had judges high-five me when they found out that I was an LSU Tiger fan. Okay, in the state of Alabama, while we are testifying, they have high-fived me during my predicate questions. I was told once I had a judge was very enamored by me. I had at the time a trainee coming to listen to me testify, so she could kind of learn the ropes a little bit. And she told me the whole time that the judge was listening to me. He was just listening intently, right? I couldn't see that because I'm focused on the jury when I'm talking. But he actually stopped me in trial and said to everyone, and this was a homicide trial. He stopped me and said, Miss Luehr, I'm so sorry to stop this, but you don't see too many women in this field. Can you please tell me how you got into this field? So I'm testifying, and this really catches me off guard. And I told you guys from the beginning that I fell in love with Silence of the Lambs, and that sparked my love for forensics. But I couldn't say that on the stand. Absolutely not. So I had to quickly think of something that I want to be a part of the criminal justice system and give back, and I'm very mechanically inclined and blah blah blah. But the best, I will tell you the best, and I won't name even the city this happened in. But I was testifying on a case. It was a little Raven. So it's a Raven 25 auto caliber firearm, very inexpensive, cheaply made firearm. And then there was some cartridge cases. Okay, this is also a homicide case. And so the defense was, trying to get me to call it something that I can't use. I couldn't use the terminology of pocket pistol. Okay, and so that's the difference, with street lingo and with the scientist lingo.
Right.
The verbiage. I have to use approved verbiage. And so I was trying to call it that it was like a compact pistol. Okay, but he kept on, trying and pushing me to say this. And then he asked me, well, can it fit in the pocket of your pants? And so after being asked so many times and me trying to tell him over and over, I finally just said, I don't know, it depends how tight your pants are. And then he asked me, well, would you stand up to demonstrate if this gun would fit in your pocket? And the judge put a stop to that, of course.
Wow.
So, I mean, there's been some inappropriate stuff in trial, but for most of the part, it's very professional. But, some judges some courts just do what they want.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
It is crazy. It is crazy. And I'm sure there's a lot more. But Pete is he's texting me. He's shedding everything. No, I'm just kidding. He's not. I'm just kidding. But we are at 9:13, so we're about 2 hours and 10 minutes in. Really great, really interesting, a lot of fun. Hope the audience really appreciates it. I think what I've heard is the amount of work behind the scenes and how much it takes for people like you to pull it together to get it. And then on the other side of it is the CSI, interesting, cool stuff. We're not doing anywhere near, I think the three of us can all agree, we're not doing anywhere near what we all want to be doing to get these worst of the worst offenders off the street, but we're doing the best we can. We're humans. Pete, I'm going to let Stephanie give a final thought, any last thing that she thinks that we should hear that we didn't mention, and then I'm going to go to you for the Finest Unfiltered tomorrow morning. I think you know who the guest is, Pat Brosnan. We'll let you do that, and then I'll do the wrap up for the executive perspective for tomorrow night. So Stephanie, this is it. This was your show. Thanks for telling us your story. Oh wait, I got a question for you. How many either contractors and or employees SCL has? How big? Like, it sounds like you got a lot of contract. Kudos to you for a great job doing really meaningful work. But give us a sense of the size of the organization. How many people are you working with? Not just yourself, but all the contractors, subcontractors. And do you have full-time employees? I don't even know.
So no full-time employees. Everybody's 1099 contractor.
Okay.
A couple of my guys still work full-time for agencies, and so they work with me on the side. And then I have a guy that I work with that actually is full-time in private forensics. I will say, I'm very fortunate. I never thought I would get into the private side. So I would say in mid-career, I've been doing this for about 18 years. That's actually Eric Freemesser, my guy from New York. He's from Rochester area, one of my contractors. But yeah, typically people retire from their government jobs and then they go into this. I made a decision to start my own business kind of mid-career. Very thankful because I get to help more agencies than just one because the need is there. There's a ton of gun crime, as we have alluded to, and there's not enough people to work it. And so I'm honored to be a part of our field and work with some amazing people. But I have a team, a solid team of 4. I have 2 more contractors that are starting with me, 2 more females. So I've got a couple guys, a couple girls, and hope they continue to grow.
Okay, well, the Finest Unfiltered, which is the parent, it's the platform where we started. Ron and Rob came in with the executive perspective, 2 retired NYPD executives give their take on police related incidents, either in New York City or around the country. And then Pete and I do the profiles of the individuals who are contributing, and then the Finest Unfiltered. So thanks for joining us, Stephanie, tonight. It was a very informative episode for those who are interested in this kind of stuff, which is fascinating. And you know what? These cases don't, it's not just an eyewitness saying that's who did this. There's a lot, especially now. Maybe that was the way it was in the 60s and 70s, but in 2026, we need everything, and we need to tell a full story of everything that happened across the board, forensically, witnesses, testimony, statements, across the board. So thanks, Stephanie, for that. Really great stuff. And you can always, clearly, Ron said you can come on anytime and do a long, much longer show than we'll tolerate here. So final thoughts, anything you want to say that we didn't get to, that my notes and anything we didn't talk about?
No, I mean, again, I'm just so honored to be a part of this field. I mean, specifically, my company and I, we're trying to continue to strive not only for, excellent work, for quality work, but like integrity. Our morals and values are very important. So I stress that in my company, and I'm just very proud to be a part of the field. And I'm so thankful for you guys for letting me come on and just talk about stuff I'm interested in. Yeah.
Well, you come back anytime we drop in, because you never know who's going to drop into the tavern. So if somebody comes in and visits, it's not uncommon for us to be talking at the end of a bar, and then someone walks in that we all know, and we bring it in. So drop in anytime. So Pete, tomorrow morning at 8:05 on April 22nd, Wednesday, the year of our Lord 2026. Retired NYPD Detective Pat Brosnan is going to drop in with John, Eric, and Marlon. So you want to tell them about Pat and your relationship with him and why it's going to be a great episode? And then I'll wrap up with Ron for tomorrow night.
Now, Pat's a very gregarious guy. He's been around a while. He's got a very thriving business now. I knew him when he's a regular detective. He was in the 46th Precinct Robbery Squad. We were workout partners together. We worked out at the Gold's Gym in Yonkers, New York. We both lived in Yonkers, not too far from each other. Pat was always a big Harley guy, so he'd pull in his red Harley, I think like a 1940-something Harley. No, good dude. One time he invited me to help. He said, "Hey, I need you to help me do a favor," and he had me go to a house that he had bought and was renovating. And we took little 3-pound sledgehammers and broke a cast iron furnace into about 1,000 pieces and carried it out. I looked like I was doing a minstrel show. I was covered in sweat. And in payment for that, he bought me a turkey and a Swiss with Thousand Island dressing and with coleslaw on it for hours and hours of work. So yeah, that's probably how he got rich. But anyway, no, good guy, fun guy to work out with. So I think it'll be a great episode.
And he's built a nice security, little security empire. So it'll be interesting to see what he's done in the afterlife of law enforcement for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. It's funny that he, as a friend, asked you to break a furnace up into little pieces. I always thought that friends help friends move, but real friends help move bodies. That's what I heard.
There might have been a body in the furnace, for all I know. Who knows?
Love it. Well, hey guys, I'm gonna jump off, but again, it was so nice, being invited to the show, and I had a blast. So, you guys stay safe as well, and I appreciate everybody who listened as well.
Yeah, Steph. So take care. I'm going to finish up with one more promo, but you're good to go. If you need anything, call me anytime. Reach out. Thank you so much. It was great. I'm going to do clips. We're going to push them out on social media, and everyone's going to watch Stephanie and all her work in this forensic space, helping put bad people in jail.
Well, thank you again. Bye, guys.
Take care, Steph. All right, tomorrow at 17:05 Wednesday, episode 61, the executive perspective. Ron and Rob are going to explore a viral video that has been circulated of an arrest by NYPD narcotics detectives that escalated into the violence, and discuss whether this force was excessive or justified, questioning when the use of force crosses the line and becomes criminal. The suspect was later found not to be involved, which is kind of interesting, and consequently the Brooklyn District Attorney has announced that he will drop the charges of resisting arrest and obstructing governmental administration. But does this change the justification? Interesting conversation. What does the law say? Moreover, does it prompt discussions about how these incidents impact public trust? The conversation will also delve into the tactics employed by the narcotics team during the operation, specifically the use of unauthorized text messaging, an unauthorized text messaging app. Let me tell you, I'm going to go sidebar on this right now. If you are using your private device for police-related activities, you are crazy. Do not use your own personal device for anything. Guess what, everybody? Your entire device is discoverable. Every single thing in it. Do not use your personal devices for police work. Pete?
I agree. Bad idea.
The detectives have since been modified, guns and shields removed. The entire team, including the supervisors and executives, I think up to a captain, has been transferred. This was justified move by the NYPD. Where does the responsibility lie? Furthermore, the discussion will shift to the comments made by the mayor, Mondami, Police Commissioner Tisch, and several politicians condemning the detectives based solely on the video. This will examine how these comments might influence future investigations. Join the interactive chat, sure to be lively tomorrow, in this highly controversial case. So with that, Pete, any final thoughts? 9:22. It's 22 minutes over. I owe you 22 minutes of my life. I'm going to try to go downstairs. I know you got to fly early. I apologize, but
yeah,
you know,
I got other stuff. No, I got to try to catch up with Jim Ferguson and LC Cheeks, who are down here as well. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that now. No big deal.
Okay. Once again, final shout out to my gun crime people: Pete Gagliardi, Ray Gadetti, Mike Garvey, and a whole bunch of other people that surely deserve to be mentioned, but we can't go through the list tonight. They've done massive contributions to suppressing violence in our communities, which is ultimately the most important thing, is to keep people safe. Everybody deserves to live peaceably. So with that, we're out. Pete, final thought. I'm going to do an outro, listen to some great blues music, and we'll see you next week. Oh, who do we have next week? Retired Inspector Steve McAllister from the NYPD, ran the NYPD football team, went to consult with Gary McCarthy in Newark, and is now the police commissioner of Floral Park, a little Long Island hamlet, which is the safest city in New York State, I think, or something. And I think he shaved his head for St. Baldrick's. So great conversation next week with a retired NYPD inspector, Steve McAllister, who grew up in the parish of Mary Queen of Heaven, Brooklyn, and we played Little League Baseball together. So with that, Pete, final thoughts, and we're out.
Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Take care, everybody. Be safe. God bless.